The discussion is, how did population elements impact the standard run scenario in limits to growth? How did population elements impact the standard run in limits to growth? So, इसमें specifically पूछ रहा है limits to growth का standard run. If you have gone through the textbook, standard textbook, you would know that limits to growth, there were 7 standard runs, wherein when limit to growth started, this one, limits to growth, when this report was there, there were 5 key elements. 5 key elements were used. 5 key elements like pollution, population, per capita income, industrial output, resource depletion. ये 5 elements लिए थे, and pollution, resources, resource will have food also, population and per capita income, per capita. These were the 5 elements that were used in LTG. In these 5 elements were tweaked. There was, and standard runs were calculated. So if these 5 elements, what is the impact on the growth? What is the impact on the growth? So when you tweak this, you tweak this, you say, okay, this is the X amount of pollution and these are constant. And then what is the impact on the growth? Then it was in all the standard runs, it was seen that the infinite growth is not possible in the finite resources. We cannot have infinite growth because the resources are finite. Absorption capacity of the nature earth is limited. हम carrying capacity limited है, resources limited है, और absorb करने की capacity भी limited है. Therefore, we cannot have this infinite growth. And this question is specifically asking, how did population elements impact the standard runs of the limits to growth? My introduction about mentioning about the limits to growth. The name of the report Club of Rome ने दिया था, Club of Rome. I can mention about Club of Rome, limits to growth, and I can also mention along that there were standard runs. That standard runs were worked upon. These standard runs told us that infinite growth is not possible in the finite, with the finite resources. Infinite growth is not possible. Infinite growth is not possible. इसके बाद, either you can talk about the elements in the diagram, either you can talk about the elements, the 5 elements, or you can also show at least एक standard run, जो diagram है in your proper book. So you have this pollution, the rise of pollution. This is resources. Pollution will increase, resources will fall down. The effect that GDP will increase and then it will fall down. There will be increase and then it will fall down. The same type of food also and industrial output also. Per capita, GDP and other things also will fall down. So per capita, food, the resources and the industrial output. At least a standard run you can show. One standard run. Now the question is the elements, the population elements impact. Standard run, there were 7 standard runs, 7 scenarios that were predicted by in your LTG. That if I double the resources, then what will be the effect on the other 5 outputs? So even if you double the resources, there will come a scene कि pollution ज़्यादा increase हो जाएगा and your earth will not have the resources. If you talk about, if I double, if I just try get such technology कि pollution एकदम कम हो गया, तो क्या impact पड़ेगा? तो ऐसे उन्होंने runs चलाए थे. 7 standard runs were done by LTG. In all of them, the conclusion was that we cannot have infinite growth. The growth, because the resources are finite. Therefore, it says that there has to be some limit to the growth that we have. So, introduction mein I'll mention about LTG. I will tell about the 5 elements. I can tell about the standard runs, and then I can also show one of the standard run. And then the conclusion that infinite growth is not possible in the finite with the finite resources. The question is about population elements. So you will have to mention about the linkages of the population elements. So about if you double the resources, If I double the resources, what is the effect? What is the effect? If I talk about reducing the population pressure, what is the effect? So, जो effect रहेगा of each of these elements that have to be specifically talked about. So even you can talk about the size of the population. That is the size of the population. How will the size of the population, if the population increases, if the number of the people increase, then what will happen? They will demand more of resources. Resource demand will increase. If the resource demand will increase, then फिर वापस से स्टैंडर्ड रन कि आपका रिसोर्स का डिमांड इंक्रीज हुआ है, रिसोर्स का डिमांड इंक्रीज हुआ, बट रिसोर्सेज क्या है, वी हैव लिमिटेड, द रिसोर्सेज आर लिमिटेड एंड देयरफॉर वी कैन नॉट हैव अ ग्रोथ, वी कैन नॉट हैव इनफाइनाइट ग्रोथ. तो आपको एलिमेंट्स लेने पड़ेंगे पॉपुलेशन के. पॉपुलेशन साइज हो गया एक एलिमेंट. सेकंड पॉपुलेशन एलिमेंट कैन आल्सो बी योर क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ. द क्वेश्चन इज अबाउट how did population elements impact the standard run? So population elements यानी क्या? Size of the population, quality of the life. That was also taken. If we have to increase, if I plan to increase, if I have to increase, if I have to impart better quality of life, then what will happen? I will have to somewhere also increase the industrial output. Convenience chahiye, we need to have increase in the industrial output. If you increase the industrial output, what will be the effect? The effect would be resource depletion as well as increase in the pollution. So there will be increase in the pollution. There will be increase in the resource depletion. So resource depletion will be there and pollution will also be increasing. And therefore, again, the scenario that we cannot have infinite growth. So how did population elements impact the standard run? These are some of the elements that LTG actually took into account. But there are various other elements that LTG did not take into account with respect to population only. It did not take into account affluence. It did not, that is distribution. It did not take into account conflicts. It did not take into account migration explicitly. Yes, the demographic transition. So, which elements of population was incorporated in LTG? But there are various other population elements which were not incorporated in your limits to growth. So, तभी तो कहते हैं कि limits to growth is probably a optimistic concept. You know this debate whether LTG, limits to growth, is the Club of Rome and the report, whether it is optimistic or pessimistic. One view is it is pessimistic because it is predicting doomsday. But other it is optimistic because still wars ki baat, nuclear issues ki baat, conflicts, migration, climate change, these are not still incorporated by the limits to growth. So you can also mention about that certain other population elements, certain elements, population elements like conflicts, migration, the transition, demographic transitions, they were not incorporated. They were not incorporated. Population itself as a resource. How far is the population skilled? That also is not incorporated. Yes. So, how did population elements impact? Yes, population elements did impact, but not all of them comprehensively was not considered. Right.